Hey everybody, this is Jeremy Tiers from Tutor Collegiate Strategies, and you're about to check out the latest episode of the Mission Admissions Podcast, a show that's designed to help higher ed become better recruiters, communicators, marketers, and managers. Each week, I'll introduce you to an industry leader or difference maker who will share helpful advice, tips, and strategies that will help you grow professionally and personally. Mission Admissions is part of the Enrollify podcast network and is made possible by Gecko, an engagement platform that makes it easy for your team to deliver a better student experience. I'm excited to share my latest candid conversation, so let's get started. Hey everybody, it's Jeremy Tiers, and this is episode 9 of the Mission Admissions podcast. I'm excited to dive right in with my latest guest, Jennifer Radke. Jen is an international speaker, author, trainer, and strategic business leader who is also the CEO of the National Institute for Social Media, an organization that offers social media training and certification programs. Jen is also a mom of teenagers, so we have all kinds of fun stuff to talk about today, including a son who just started his first year of college down at Texas A&M. She's also a Minnesota Vikings fan like me, which is a good thing, hopefully this year, fingers crossed. So welcome to the show, Jen.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. I'm excited to be here.
I appreciate you spending some time with us today, and there's a number of things I definitely want to pick your brain on. I would love to start, though, with this idea of having, just gone through the college search with your son. I'm always interested. I have neighbors across from me and next to me who, just like you in the last 12 months, have lived it. And it's been very interesting to get their point of view just from a parent lens. And so just if you're willing to share with us, what were some of the biggest fears or concerns you had as a parent going through this process, whether it was, again, Minnesota to Texas is obviously a big, ultimately transition there, but just anything you're willing to share around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a piece of information I maybe haven't shared with you yet is I actually spent 12 years in higher ed admissions. And so when we started the process with my son, I wasn't very nervous about the admissions itself, right? I was like, I know this, right? I know what we need to do. And I quickly found out that that's not necessarily the case anymore. A lot had changed in the 10 years since I had left higher ed. Not only the intricate details about things like universal app or how people are applying with test scores or not test scores in a edge of COVID world, but really kind of what was the method for the students to be preparing. So what happened for me is quickly I learned I didn't know what I thought I knew, and there wasn't anywhere to go find it. So I felt like I was a little lost in supporting my eldest getting ready to go off to school. And then because the communication has changed so much and we use social media and texting and those types of things a lot more than we did 10 years ago when I was in admissions, I was like not in the conversations. I didn't even really know what schools he had applied to until I sat down at the kitchen table and said, hey, what have you done? Where are you going? So some of those concerns were just around being, whether or not I was being helpful. Then there comes the ones once I realized where he was applying and only one of them was in the state of Minnesota. And I went, oh, now that provides all kinds of new things. And I couldn't say a word because I left Minnesota and went to Texas to school as well, so I couldn't say you have to stay close. But then it became things like, well, what does an out-of-state student need to be successful? What should we know as far as registration, financial aid, moving in? What are the legal things we should have in place for an 18-year-old who is technically an adult but will likely need support. For example, if they get sick, do you have a healthcare directive and power of attorney and that kind of stuff, which I hadn't even thought about.
So where did you ultimately, as somebody who's familiar, at least with college admissions a little bit and how it works on your end, and then, you obviously know what I do in my day to day. Colleges are sending a ton of emails, a ton of text messages to all different kinds of groups, students and their parents throughout this process. Where did you ultimately find a lot of that information? Did your son connect with his admissions counselor at A&M? Was it you went to the website? Was it a combination of things?
It was a combination of things. A&M is humongous. It's a massive institution that's been around a long time. So there wasn't like an admissions counselor that he could reach out to. So we did look a lot on the website, any emails that he would get. There were some groups on Facebook for parents that were entering for this year. So we asked a lot of, or could listen to, I didn't actually ask a lot of questions, but I could listen to a lot of the questions and answers that were being given there. We were a little fortunate because Paul, my son, was looking at the Corps of Cadets, which is an ROTC program within Texas A&M. And therefore, there was a little bit more of ease of contact between those folks. What do we need to know for somebody entering into the Corps? And so we had some additional context to look at there. But for the most part, it was trying to comb through websites and emails that we were given.
Well, and as somebody who kind of lives in part of that world in your day to day, I mean, what advice would you give anybody listening to this who works at a college if they just want to make this whole process easier? Not just for parents, right? And it doesn't have to be the website specifically, it can be, but just what do you think, right? Knowing what you know now, if colleges would just do maybe one or two things, this would make this process a lot easier for families.
I think everybody, but especially those in higher education, and I've been guilty of this as well because I spent a good portion of my life there. We need to simplify what we're doing. Less is more. So create some helpful checklists. Differentiate maybe your in-state students from your out-of-state students and provide resources. It's great to talk about all these wonderful accolades that your faculty have. That's great because we want a quality program. But when it comes to the admissions process, help us through it by making it simple. What's the process? What's the path? Stop trying to impress us. Financial aid isn't super impressive, right? Just tell us what we need to know and the steps we need to have it done.
And it is. It's just, there's so many different steps in this process. And unfortunately, it's not the same at every institution, right? And so anybody listening, just anything you can do from a communication standpoint, as Jen said, to simplify. I continue to hear the same thing from, again, the neighbors that I referenced earlier, just when they were actually able to connect with somebody at the school their son and the daughter in one example chose, and or right, read through some of the massive amount of emails they were getting, and they actually found a few that were a little bit more easy on the eyes and simplified the process. To your point, it makes at least part of what is a super stressful process easier. So how do you think social media plays into all of that? Because this is your world, and I know you're very good at it. I got to believe it probably is different from an impact for, somebody like your son going through the process versus a parent. But if you were advising a college or university, just, in terms of how they should be utilizing social media, going through that process again, what would you tell them?
Keep your audience in mind. A lot of schools, or the different ones that he looked at, as well as the ones my junior currently is looking at for 2 years from now, when you go online and you look at their social, sometimes the message is just really convoluted and confusing, and you can't tell if they're speaking to a student or a parent or an alumni who might be a donor, or just putting out something for the sake of putting it out, right? The schools that really attracted our attention on social, and A&M has some social channels that do this really well, are the ones who are keeping their audience clearly in mind, right? And sharing the information that's relevant and important for that audience and not trying to add a bunch of other stuff. One of the challenges, I think, for an institution is what does that look like? Because, when you've got a school the size of, and we'll just use A&M as an example, they've got hundreds of channels, if not thousands, of different departments and different groups offering things on Facebook or Instagram. And so it's like, how do you keep that message on brand? How do you make sure that there are things that are being compliant that are sent out? And that all just kind of goes back to having a good outline for your team and making sure that they're always addressing the audience and their needs. It's a challenge. I don't envy the large schools for having to manage all that, but it is, I think, important. We found it helpful when they were simply talking to the audience. And if it was me as a parent on Facebook, then they were giving different information than they were to my son on Instagram.
I don't think I've met a single higher ed professional that loved everything about their technology stack. Here's the honest truth. No CRM or SIS will be able to meet all of the needs of all of your team. And that's why I'm a huge fan of Gecko, a student engagement platform that offers customizable modules designed to complement your institution's CRM and SIS. Gecko offers plug-and-play modules that enable your team to deliver memorable student experiences at scale. Their chatbot and texting tools will empower your admissions team to engage with the highest quality prospects by serving as a front line of defense for prospects that have basic questions about the college admissions process. Gecko's event module makes it easy to create awesome online and in-person event experiences one time and then duplicate them throughout the year with just a couple of clicks. Their call center is also an industry leader. No more splitting call lists into a dozen Excel files, scrolling through data to find who you need to call next, or having to manually record who picked up and who didn't. Oh, and did I mention that everything integrates seamlessly into your CRM and SIS? Because it does. So if you're a Slate school, for example, you'll see all of that sweet interaction data in your student's timeline. If you want to level up how you engage with prospective students, but you don't want to disrupt your processes, rip out all your tech, or start a new CRM procurement process, you need to check Gecko out. You can learn more about their offerings at geckoengage.com/Enrollify. And be sure to tell them that Jeremy and the Enrollify team sent you their way. You hit on the two platforms that and all the data we have when we ask students and parents going through this process, hey, if you're going to go to social media for different colleges and universities that either the student's looking at or that their child is looking at, parents say, I tend to go to Facebook, and students say, well, regardless of how many of these you let me check, Instagram, number one, is where I go right now more than I go anyplace else. So I wonder, to your point, and I've heard other people talk about this, and I'd love your take, would it be helpful, and is there enough advantages to a school saying, okay, instead of having 600 Instagram accounts or 600 Facebook accounts, we're going to try to minimize this, because then if we do that, how does that allow us to speak to our audience, knowing that, to your point, there are a bunch of different audiences we're trying to speak to?
I do think that there is a value in consolidation to a point, right? For example, perhaps the athletic department is all one channel, but you don't necessarily need a tennis, a soccer, a football, a swim, et cetera, et cetera. Because typically somebody who's going to be excited about the athletics is going to be excited about more than just one, even if they're football fans. It's challenging because, like I said earlier, like A&M is so large, and we were fortunate because Paul was looking at the Corps of Cadets. We had a smaller group of people to kind of contact. One of the challenges we had, though, was that the information coming out from like student life and housing was not the same for us. So I got, I don't even know, at least a dozen packets from Residence Life mailed to my door with how to buy bedding, right? But my kid's in the Corps of Cadets. He is allowed white flat sheets and a maroon comforter, period, right? Like, there's no customizing his bedding because of the ROTC portion of the program. And so I was like, wow, you guys are wasting a lot of money sending this to a parent that can't use it, right? And so I think there are differentiations that need to be made, but we need to really think about what's the easy piece that communicates simply to those coming in what they need to know. And hopefully saves us a little money and energy too.
Well, no doubt, and I don't think you'd have anybody on the other end listening to this complain, right? If they could do things a little more effectively and efficiently. And to your point, content creation, I feel like on social, or quite honestly in any regard with communications from colleges, if you understand your audience and you make content for them and not you, typically, right, that's the content that seems to resonate and be most helpful. What do you think are some of the biggest do's and don'ts then when it comes to social media right now? Like, as you're working with different clients and talking with people, just what are you telling them? Hey, we need to do more of this, or we need to start this, or you need to stop doing this, and here's why.
I don't think it's really any different from what most people have been saying for the last couple of years. We need to be visual as much as possible. I think that is, to your point earlier, as to why the students are going to Instagram, is they want to picture themselves at said college and university. They want to picture themselves as part of that community and organization. And so having videos, having images that allow them that opportunity to visualize it and maybe see themselves there is huge. The parents, they want to see it, but more than that, they want to understand and comprehend. So being a resource, sharing information that's likely going to be in text format, maybe video, right? Like if you need to know an explainer or something like that, but really making sure that the content is right for the audience and fills that need that they have, answers the questions that they have, not just what we think is most important, right? And that's, it's a hard balance. It's tricky. One of the schools, and I'm not going to pick on them by name, but one of the schools that my son had applied to added me to some parent emails. Fine, right? A lot of the schools did. But this particular college added me to the safety warnings email. So I was finding out about maybe any shootings that happened in the area or break-ins that had happened in the area. But I wasn't getting any of the other stuff. And so I was like, what are they trying to do here? Right? Like, send me away from this school? Because now that wasn't the reason. He didn't go there. But it was very interesting to me that that was what they had chosen to provide as content to incoming freshman parents. We need to think through that. And I'm sure that the thought process was, you know, we need to tell people we're on top of it and make them aware because maybe they're worried already about the city. I wasn't worried. I know the city, right? So tell me instead what's good, what's happening, how we can get through this process. What does starting off as a freshman look like for our student if we go to this school? So it really is thinking not through what we feel we need to communicate, but what does the students and the parents need to hear?
Yeah, and I think the easiest way, I would argue, Jen, to always get that answer is just to ask. I mean, you know, and I understand you can't, if you're listening to this and you work obviously at a college or university, you can't ask every student and parent in this process. You're not going to get a hold of every one of them, let alone have everyone reply and engage with you and tell you. But there is just so much data out there. You know, we see it all the time when we ask specifically, hey, what do you want to see on social media? What should colleges and universities be showing prospective students? And to your point, the answer is the same almost every time. It's 6 to 8 things around what's it going to be like if I come there as a student. But I also want to see it more from the current student point of view and not necessarily the admissions person, the marketing person, the leadership on this, you know, part of campus. I just want to hear from an authentic voice that hopefully hasn't been told exactly what to say and can speak to some of the things that I'm wondering about because I'm not there every day. And then, you know, for parents, same thing, right? Okay, if I'm going to send my child 30 minutes away or 7 states in a plane ride away, what is that going to look like from a standpoint of safety? How is my child going to be cared for? How does that change the cost potentially? And all of those type things. And it's just, to your point, getting that feedback from your audience, I think, and then figuring out how do we explain these things then in a way that's going to resonate with them. Hopefully that helps them see themselves here more than so at other schools.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And to your point, hearing the voice of the current students, immensely powerful, right? And impactful. What are they learning? What are they loving? Right? What activities are they in? And is there time for that?
How much did your son connect with current students when he was going through this? Not just at A&M where he ended up choosing, but you know, you don't have to name schools, but
Yeah.
did he actually have an opportunity, or did schools create, either through different email opportunities, through if you visited campuses, through any medium, the opportunity to offer either the current student point of view or connect him with current students?
So of the five that he applied to, I would say A&M was the best at that. They offered opportunities specifically for like an overnight with the Corps of Cadets, so he could actually go stay overnight. We went to a midnight yell. We went to a football game. You know, we did those types of things. The other four, I don't know that he actually had a lot of opportunity to engage with current students. It was more admissions inviting him to such and such event, right? And there wasn't much of a highlight of the fact that there might be students there. And so we went to very few other events because he didn't feel like it was needed. He's like, I already know what I need for admissions. I've applied, right? I've been accepted. So why do I have to go through this other admissions thing? And that surprised me. I figured there might be more, group messages or, group me organizations or something of students that were looking or accepted at schools that wanted to connect with current students or even each other to communicate. Why are you choosing schools? What are you looking at that's important? What stood out to you? So,
Yeah, and that definitely exists, I would argue, through a bunch of, different opportunities. But it is interesting that you bring up this idea of, boy, these admissions events, the way they were basically, laid out to us was more, well, you're going to come hear about all of what I would argue are transactional things that you just need to do in this process. And you have, a student over here going, great, okay, it's not that that stuff's not important, but I'd much more like to hear about, obviously, the current student point of view and just, things, again, that you can't, I would argue, unless you go visit and just spend time with a student somehow, know about, right? And so I think definitely the way that colleges focus on advertising those events needs to change. Why do you think then, we know how powerful social media is, right? Like, I don't think there's a person listening to this who doesn't understand the reach, the capabilities of, when you communicate, in an authentic way with content that your target audience finds helpful and valuable. So why do you think marketers, not just in higher ed, Jen, but in so many different industries, just underestimate the power of social still in 2022?
oh, that's kind of a big and loaded question. I think they know the power deep down. Harnessing it is the challenge, right? And so we skip over it. We don't do the planning necessary to really spend the time and identify who are our audiences that we want to reach. What does that content look like in each of those different ways? Because it's extremely time intensive and challenging and requires us to not just post every day, but to spend that time focusing on, are we actually meeting what our goals are? I think the other struggle that a lot of folks feel, and I'd love input from your listeners here, but I think they feel pressure from leadership often to just go out and do this thing because it's new, or they heard it's working for somebody else, or their kid told them that that's where they're spending all their time, and there isn't any support given to doing the work and the validation that that's where your audience is for this particular organization or institution, right? So I think a lot of marketers, they get the power, but they can't quite harness it yet because of that back end planning that isn't supported quite to the level that we need it to be.
I was on a campus, a couple of weeks ago, and it was funny. An admissions leader said to me, I was having a conversation with another group on campus, and they said, well, why don't you just send the students another text, or why don't you go post something on social media? I'm sure. And to your point, right, that's not always the answer, even if other people seem to think it
Mm-hmm.
is, because this generation obviously likes to text each other, likes to DM each other on social platforms. You hit on something there, though, that I know I get asked a lot. And so I'm curious, what advice would you give then to somebody who's like, okay, we do have to show results to leadership, and we are trying to measure how whatever we're creating, is actually working or not working. So, what type of advice are you going to give people if I say, give me a couple of things they can do to try to make some more measurable, results
Mm-hmm.
from ultimately all of the content they're creating on social?
Yeah, if we've done the planning process and we've set benchmarks and goals for ourselves, hopefully they follow one of the fantastic acronyms around setting goals. We use the SMART acronym, right? So specific, measurable is number 2, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So if we set our goals in a way that they can be measurable, then it's easier for us to go to leadership and say, here's how we produced on this measure. The challenge I think a lot of us have is getting away from those vanity metrics. We need 1,000 more followers on Instagram, and really into those engagement metrics, those metrics that actually give us a better indication of whether or not we are reaching the audience in a positive way. I can put out motivational quote after motivational quote, but does that bring me any new social media strategists to get certified? Likely not, right? So we just need to take a look and decide what are those goals, set those measurements right away, and then report on those measurements. And a lot of that means we have to communicate very clearly with leadership as to why we're measuring the things that we're measuring, and why it's not okay just to say we need 1,000 new followers on Instagram. And it so becomes an educational process as well as a reporting process.
What are some of those engagement metrics, Jen, that you're talking about?
It kind of depends on where you're at, but clicks, comments, shares, those are all a little bit more valuable than a simple like or even a reaction to a post. Because like I said, I can post motivational metrics that will get reactions all day long, but they're not going to actually start conversation or push people through to a website.
And I was going to ask you about this later, but now seems like the perfect time based on what we've been talking about. I don't know how much you dive into social listening with your clients. I know how important it is. I think you know how important it is. I think it's the next level once, right? Schools get more consistent with their content, have a full time staff member actually producing said content and not somebody who has it as a secondary responsibility. So, how much do you think social listening actually factors into this whole measurement and being able to show results then?
Oh, I think it's huge. Not so much initially in sharing results, because I think you have to know what you're going to do with the information you're listening to. We had a client at one point that had invested thousands of dollars into this software that put together all this social listening data, but they weren't doing anything with it, right? So that doesn't help to have the data if you're not actually going to take action on it. But social listening should be key to finding out what content does our audience need. If we're out there and we're listening to keywords that are relevant to our industry, so if we're talking higher education, right, we talk about admissions and universities and choosing schools and all of that, go listen to the conversations that are being had. If 75% of the questions are about this area over here, does our content answer that area? Right? Have we put something out there that can help address that? And then you can look more specifically at the relevancy of your content and measure it.
Yeah, I think we're going to see schools harness that a lot more in the coming years. But to your point, I think step one for so many people I see is just slowing down and kind of back to where we started this conversation. Is what we are putting out content wise actually helpful in what our audience wants to see? Or is it something that we think they need to see, but we really don't have any data that actually supports that, right?
Yep. Well, I was going to say, Jeremy, but when we're thinking about listening to, one of the things a lot of times that gets skipped is we listen to the mentions, right? We're tagged in something, we address that, but it doesn't stop there. We need to be looking for the people who maybe don't know how to utilize social properly to tag us, or who might not mention a specific school but have a question or a need that we could fill. Hashtags can be really valuable here too. I was shocked back, oh gosh, it must have been November when Paul and I drove down to Texas for an overnight. I took a picture, put it on Twitter, and I did tag Texas A&M and they replied. But I also tagged a road trip. And I was shocked at the brands that jumped into that conversation and wished us safe travels. Like Goodyear tires was right there. I didn't mention them. I didn't talk about my tires, right? But it's something that stuck with both my son and I, that they jumped into that conversation on those hashtags. So social listening is a little broader and probably a little scarier than what some people want to invest the time in. And it is something we value. We actually are just finalizing a revision to our social listening short course.
Hey, all, Zach here from Enrollify. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, admissions, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks that are all designed to empower you to become a better higher ed professional. Our shows feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Mickey Baines, Jeremy Tears, Jaime Hunt, Corynn Myers, Jaime Gleason, and many, many more. You can learn more about the Enrollify Podcast Network at podcasts.enrollify.org. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea. Find yours at podcasts.enrollify.org.
There's no doubt it's powerful, and I would argue to anybody listening to this, there are all kinds of tools out there that can help you with social listening, whether it's stuff that Jen and, she's doing with the National Institute, or, those of you who are familiar with Campus Sonar, they do some amazing things in that space as well.
They do.
I just think, at the start of the day, going back to having a plan and figuring out how are we going to take whatever data we accumulate and actually put it into action versus just saying, look at all this data we have, now what? And unfortunately, right, that's, I think, what I see too often. What else has your attention lately? Just where are you focusing a lot of your time, Jen, whether it's social or not even that, it's something else you're doing with clients? What's got your attention?
Personal branding. It has come out a lot over the last couple of years. It's always been important, I think, for individuals to understand what they stand for, who they are, what value they bring to an organization. But I think that COVID and the digital environment that we entered into for the last few years has really brought that to attention. People are focusing a little bit more on what they put out personally and professionally. So I think that'll continue. The value of communicating our expertise via digital platforms will continue. One of the things that people need to more than ever steer away from is the cold sell situation online. You were talking about it, and when we were discussing the tools, and leadership saying just do this fun thing because somebody said it was cool. I have a great example I just got yesterday, which was somebody on LinkedIn sent me a note and said, "Are you utilizing TikTok for your advertising?" And I'm like, if you would have looked at us, we don't even use TikTok right now, right? And so I responded and I said, no, we're not. And then it was immediately why. And I'm like, well, if you know anything about what we do, you might realize that may not be the main audience that we have currently, right? And if you don't, then maybe you should ask those questions before you're just selling me your TikTok ads. But that's exactly what happened. When I said I didn't, I was sent links to these case studies of where it worked really well. And I'm like, that's not relevant to my world right now. Is TikTok valuable for certain brands? Absolutely. Absolutely. Is it relevant for me right now? No. And do I have the bandwidth? No. And that's an important question we forget to ask too. And folks need to stop selling and start learning and listening.
Personalization and relevancy, right? Two things that I would argue, especially those going through the college search process, want from different schools, need from different schools more than they're probably getting. To your point, it's become so much harder just to get our attention in 2022 that if I start to read an email and go, wait, this has nothing to do with me, why would you send this to me? And oh, by the way, I don't know who you are, right? It's like a double whammy of click, delete, I'm out. And young people, I would argue, it's the exact same thing. And I would like to dive in a little bit more to this idea of building your personal brand because I agree with you. It's something that comes up a lot. And I hear people all the time saying, well, I always wonder what this is, or what does this person on campus do? And I'm like, go ask them, number one, if you're comfortable doing that. But even if you're not, the power of so many different platforms, I use LinkedIn as a good example, right? There's so many people who do that role in all kinds of different, right, places across this country. Reach out and start trying to have a conversation with some of those people, right? Expand your network. And I think in that process, right, you educate yourself about a bunch of things. But besides just that, how do you think somebody then listening, if they haven't started building their personal brand, like where do they start, Jen? What are some quick, easy things they can do?
They can start by sitting down with a piece of paper and identifying what is it they think people should know about them, right? Like, what are the questions they get asked the most when they go to a networking event? These are some places to start, right? I agree with you. LinkedIn is a kind of a go-to for personal branding, especially in the professional space. So then go to that profile and build it, right? In the way that helps educate people, helps inform them about who you are and the value you bring. Don't copy a job description, but really describe what you do and what about that do you love, right? Where do you excel? Job descriptions are so frustrating, right? And it's boring to hear, I answer telephones. Cool. Do you do it better than somebody else? Or why is this relevant to the conversation? Tell me more about that. And it is okay to say something that isn't all 100% aligned with your career. What are those volunteer projects or organizations that you're passionate about? What are those, if you do something freelance on the side, what is that? Because all of us are more than the sum of the work that we do during the 8-hour workday. And I say 8-hour, but you know what I mean.
110%.
In the course of our workday, we're not defined by that. What makes us stronger as a value employee at an organization is the sum of all of our parts, right? So share that with people. Tell people what you're passionate about.
Yeah, and then I think it opens up the opportunity, right, to, get introduced to new communities and become a part of new communities. That's, something I actually talked about with my last guest, Carrie Keating. The power of community, I think we all hopefully understand that in 2022 as well. And social, right, and building your personal brand 110% allows you to expand your community online. So, I did read a stat that I was curious to get your feedback on recently, which is, and I feel like it ties into this notion of like, what is brand, to your son, to, a young person today versus what is brand to an adult, which is almost 60% of teens interact more with user generated, right, media content than actual quote unquote brand content. So why do you think that is, Jen?
We put trust into folks that look and sound and present like we do. And I think that a lot of times brands miss that mark, right? They've got some celebrity or some, superior athlete repping their brand. But what we really want to see, and I think what our kids want to see, are people like us that actually use that brand and rep that brand. I know it more so for my son than my daughter, but even her as a junior in high school, she looks at those people that are using the products that she's interested in long before she goes and researches the product brand, whether it be, makeup or handbags or whatever. And the same goes with my son, right? Like if he wants to bulk up, he's kind of a skinny dude. So if he wants to bulk up, He's going to go look for swimmers or athletes that are relevant to him, and what are they doing to bulk up? Not, Mr. Universe or whatever, and those that are already massive. And that's where that user-generated content comes in. I think they also think it's more real, right? Because, and some of this we know may not be true, but a lot of the kids think that, well, if it's out here by so-and-so, it's not paid for, right? It's not an advertisement. And we know that that's not always true. There are micro-influencers and things that are happening where they may be brand sponsors. But it looks more legit, more authentic, more real. When it's coming from the marketing department, it looks like you're paid to say good things about your brand, right? And so that's why they're engaging more with alternative content.
I also wanted to pick your brain on the idea that, and I hear this all the time, and I'm sure you do too, but I need a young person, Jen, to help me be good on social media. Like, how am I going to get somebody who's in their mid-30s with more experience to like understand how to communicate with this generation? So whether we talk about that myth, I would call it, more, or anything else, like, how do you respond to something like that?
So typically, and I hear it all the time, I need to find someone young who understands the platform. My immediate response is be wary, because they may understand the platform, but they may not understand the business acumen needed to necessarily represent your brand. And in there would come maybe a conversation around compliance, right? Just because we use technology doesn't mean we know how to run a contest on Instagram legally within its, terms of service and use. And so I do share that often with brands. I also highlight the difference between an individual sharing their daily life and content that helps to educate and inform a potential buyer or a potential customer, a community member, right? And so it's, once you get that opportunity and they've actually validated that statement, like, oh, I just need to hire my niece or whatever, and you can have that conversation, all of a sudden they slow down and they go, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. But unfortunately, it is a huge discrimination piece right now. I know several folks that are in their upper 40s and 50s who have been in marketing, who have embraced social media. They understand how it works, but they're being told they're simply too old to do social media. And I get blown away by that because those brands need to take a look at those folks a little bit differently and understand, do they master the tools? Can they communicate content in the right way that's relevant for your brand? Maybe you don't need a 60-year-old person doing the TikTok videos for an audience that's mostly 13. Fine. So you hire someone to do the videos, right? But the content strategy and the culmination of how it works to your goals, age doesn't play into that. It's knowledge and experience.
I don't know if you've thought about it, but I got asked about it the other day, and I thought, perfect question to ask Jen when I talked to her. How do you think virtual reality will change social media? Any thoughts on that? I know it's early, but...
Yeah, it is early. And for most brands right now, I say just keep an eye on it, right? Don't stress about it. It's going to be interesting. One of the things that I believe might come that nobody's really talking about is the increase of disbelief, right? We're already, as consumers, somewhat tentative and nervous about fake news. But when you start getting VR, AR into that world a little bit more, we start questioning, is this real, right? Was this created while I stood on campus at XYZ University, or did they do this in a alternate reality, right? So I think that's going to come. I think there are some really cool things that could come with it too, though. I mean, better visuals of the audience, more gamification, which we know the younger people enjoy. I had the pleasure of, when we were driving down to Texas the last time to move my son down, we stopped at the National World War I Museum in Kansas City. And they had a virtual reality tour of what it was like to be in a bunker in World War I. It was wild. But it was probably more impactful than any video I've ever seen or any book I've ever read about it. So I think we could see it really helping people envision situations in a new way. But I do think we'll have some apprehension around what's real and what's fake when that comes and plays more into the marketing space.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think authenticity will be something which, again, you and I have heard it. I'm sure tons of people listening have heard it, right? It's been a buzzword for years. So there's that side of the coin. But then the other side I go to listening to you there is, well, how do we all make decisions every day? Well, based on how we feel, right? And if I can feel like, oh my gosh, I'm in a World War I bunker and this feels completely different than if I'm sitting back in front of my phone, iPad, or computer watching a video, right? Like, I think it's just going to be a whole different set of emotions, to your point, that can get evoked if you've created right content the right way. So it will definitely be interesting. And I get asked all the time, when do you think that's going to come? And I'm no expert, so I have no idea. I don't know if it's in 2 years, 5 years, or 25 years. But to your point, keep an eye on it because it is coming. It's just a matter of time. So
it'll be fun to watch it. I mean, like I said, museums are not necessarily the thing teenagers say, let's go to, right? This particular exhibit was amazing. My son was enthralled. I was enthralled, right? Like, and as I said, it was more meaningful and impactful than walking through, the eons and eons of display booths that had the old guns or the old tanks or the old whatever from the World War I there, because I could feel it and imagine myself spending 30 days in a bunker that was constantly taking fire, feeling the vibrations, hearing the sounds, and thinking, 30 days? I'm not sure I can take 3 more minutes, So people are using it in interesting ways already. I think we're going to continue to see that. How it evolves into the marketing space is still a bit of an unknown, but it's intriguing and something that will be fun to watch.
how's your son, well, how is your daughter going through this college search then differently than your son, if you're willing to share?
I have 2 very different children. My son was, well, at first he was looking at military academies. And so we did some visits of those. And after he decided he didn't necessarily want the academy route, he started looking at like ROTC programs and then just random schools that were of interest and cool looking, like the University of Montana. It's in a really cool area right outside of Yellowstone, right? And I'm like, does it even have a program you're interested in? My daughter, on the other side, is very planned and pragmatic. So she is scoping schools first and foremost by their degree offerings. She feels she knows what she wants to do, so she's looking there. She is keeping an Excel spreadsheet of every college who's reached out to her so far. There are 60 that have reached out just based on her PSAT score that she took last year. And she watches acceptance numbers, like how prestigious is the school, and is it like an Ivy League, and are there departments well known? Now, she's also a girl in STEM, so she also looks into faculty and says, as a girl in STEM, are there any faculty that represent my demographic at this school? So very different approaches. He was looking for a feel, right? What school feels right. She doesn't really want to go to a bunch of schools until she knows the academia is where she wants it to be and the prestige is where she wants it to be.
Yeah. And I kind of figured you might go down that route because, I hear it all the time, which, well, they're just so different if I have 2, children or go. I think it kind of puts a nice bow on everything we've talked about today, which is your audience is different. Whether you're talking to them through a social platform or you're talking to them through an email, a text, eventually, right, virtual reality, whatever it might be, how are you giving them things that are going to be helpful to them, as well as hopefully educating and making this process a little bit more simplified and easier for them? So Jen, I've been ending every podcast with the same couple of things. The first is a signature question that I ask everyone, which I'd like you to tell me an important piece of advice that somebody's given you at any point in your life that just really has stuck.
So it's kind of a strange one. At one point in my life, I was told not everyone is naturally talented as you. So I was not to expect others to do the things that I did. And I was blown away by that because nothing that I do is exceptionally talented. Like, I don't have any special powers, right? But what that has done is made me really evaluate the folks that I'm working with and support them with resources and tools to strengthen their own experiences. And I think that has been the most helpful thing that I was ever told.
The last thing I want to do, Jen, is what I call fun rapid fire. And it's just a handful of things I'm going to ultimately give to you. And I just want some quick, instant feedback from you, okay?
Okay.
Favorite singer?
Oh, Reba McEntire.
Wine or beer?
Wine.
Most underrated wine, then?
Oh, goodness. Cupcake.
Okay. Most underrated city in the U.S., though, you've been to?
Oh, gosh.
Something that's better than you expected it to be.
Duluth, Minnesota.
It's a very fun place there on the North Shore. Fun fact that most people don't know about you.
I spent 3 months in India.
Ah. And what's the best thing, as somebody listening to this who lived in Minnesota for years, I gotta believe if it's not an annual tradition, you go to the Minnesota State Fair at least a handful of times. So what's the best thing about the Minnesota State Fair in your opinion?
The food?
Yes. Sweet
Anything
Martha's
on a
cookies.
Stick. Well, that's true. If you want to be specific, Sweet Martha's cookies, but anything on a stick, you know?
Yeah. I miss that about Minnesota. As somebody who lived there for years, I think it's, a vastly underrated fun activity that a lot of Minnesotans, anybody listening to this who's ever been to it probably would appreciate too. Thanks so much, Jen, for just being on and sharing some things with us today. If people want to learn more either just about the National Institute for Social Media or just connect with you, what's the best way? How would you want them to go about doing that?
Yeah, so LinkedIn probably is the best way to connect with me. You can find my name, Jennifer Radke, SMS, there easily. Otherwise, the National Institute for Social Media's website is nismonline.org. I'm also a big Twitter user, so you can find me there at RadkeJen. So any of those are more than welcome.
Awesome. Thanks again so much for your time today, Jen.
Thank you, Jeremy. It was a pleasure.
Hey, all, Zach here from Enrollify. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mission Admissions with Jeremy Tiers. If you like this episode, do us a huge favor and hit that follow and subscribe button below. Furthermore, if you've got just 2 minutes to spare, we would greatly appreciate you leaving a rating and a review of this show on Apple Podcasts. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, admissions, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks that are all designed to empower you to become a better higher ed professional. But Enrollify is far more than just a podcast network. Enrollify is where higher ed comes to learn new marketing skills, discover new products and services, and find their next job. We're a growing learning community of 4,000 members, and we'd love to welcome you into the fold. You can access our free blog articles, newsletters, e-courses, and more, or purchase our master course on how to market a university with Terry Flannery at enrollify.org. We look forward to meeting you soon and welcoming you into the community. Again, you can subscribe for free at enrollify.org.